Good evening and welcome, however you have come to be here tonight, and wherever you happen to be resting as you listen. I am so glad that you decided to join me. Perhaps you are already settled into bed, with the lamp turned low and the room gone soft and dim around you. Perhaps you are lying awake at the end of a long and tiring day, or resting somewhere far from your own bed, in those still and quiet hours when almost everyone else has already drifted off to sleep. Before we set off, there is one small thing I would love to know. Where in the world are you listening from tonight? If you feel like sharing, leave a quiet word below to say hello and to tell me which corner of the world you are resting in. There is something rather comforting in the thought of so many people, scattered right across the map, all settling down beneath the very same night sky at the very same moment. And if these calm recordings help carry you off to sleep at the end of the day, a gentle like and a quiet subscribe do more to help this small channel keep going than you might think. Tonight, we are going to travel a very long way from your pillow, though not out into the cold and the dark this time. Tonight, we are going to travel backward, through time itself, down through the long ages of our own world, to a stretch of its history so distant that the continents themselves wore different shapes and stood in different places. We are going to spend some slow, unhurried time in the age of the dinosaurs, walking gently through the world those animals lived in, getting to know what they truly were, how their long reign began and how it ended, and what we have learned patiently by reading the stones they left behind. We will get a feel, first, for how very long ago all of this was, and for the staggering length of time that dinosaurs walked the earth. We will sort out, kindly, what a dinosaur actually is, and which famous creatures were not dinosaurs at all, but only their cousins. We will meet the long-necked giants and the great hunters, and set aside a few of the old myths about them. We will discover that many dinosaurs wore feathers, and that we have even begun, in a few cases, to read the colors they wore. We will look at how our whole picture of these animals has changed, from sluggish reptiles to something far livelier. And we will walk, at the end, to the day their world came apart, and to the quiet, surprising truth that dinosaurs are not entirely gone, even now. There is nothing here you need to hold on to. There is nothing to study, nothing to memorize, and there will be no questions waiting at the end. This is not a lesson so much as a long, slow, wandering visit to a world that vanished long ago, and you are welcome to follow along with as much or as little of it as you like. If you find yourself drifting off somewhere in the middle, long before we make our way back to the present, please do not feel that you have missed a thing. Drifting off is exactly what all of this is for, and it would be the loveliest possible way to spend the night. So settle in now, as comfortably as you can. Let the pillow take the whole weight of your head. Let your shoulders come down away from your ears and soften, and let your eyes close whenever they would like to. Take one slow breath in, and let it ease all the way out again. And when you are ready, we will step very gently backward, out of tonight, and into the deep past, to walk for a while through the age of the dinosaurs. Before we meet a single dinosaur, we have to do something that our minds are not really built to do, and we have to do it slowly and gently, because there is no rushing it. We have to try to feel how long ago all of this was, not just to know the number, but to feel it a little, the way you feel the depth of the sea when you stand at the edge of it and look out. Because the truth is that the age of the dinosaurs is so far behind us that the ordinary words we use for time, a long time, an age ago, ancient, simply give out. They are the wrong size. They were made for the span of a human life, or a handful of lives stacked end to end. And the dinosaurs need something far larger than that. Let us build up to it in gentle steps. Think back, first, over your own life, all the years of it, the ones you remember and the earliest ones you do not. Now think of the life of the oldest person you have ever known, a grandparent perhaps, and lay your own life end to end with theirs, and then with theirs before them, back and back, one lifetime after another, in a long, patient chain. 100 such lifetimes laid end to end would carry you back past almost the whole of written history, back before the great cathedrals, back before the oldest empires anyone learns about in school. And yet 100 lifetimes, that whole long chain of people, would not even begin to reach the dinosaurs. It would not cover 1,000th of the way. It would not cover 1,000th of 1,000th of the way. The distance is simply of another kind. So let us leave lifetimes behind, because they are hopeless here, and speak in millions of years instead, which is the only measure large enough. The last of the dinosaurs, the ones that were not birds, died out around 66 million years ago. 66 million years. Try saying it slowly. If you were somehow to count off those years, one at a time, one every second, without ever stopping to eat or sleep or rest, you would be counting for more than 2 years just to reach a single million. To count out all 66 million, 1 second at a time, would take you well over 100 years of counting without a pause, longer than any human life. And that is only to reach the end of the age of dinosaurs, only to arrive at the last of them. Their beginning lies far, far deeper still. Here is the part that surprises almost everyone, and it is worth resting on, because it quietly turns our usual picture upside down. We tend to imagine the dinosaurs as a single lost world, all crowded together in one vanished golden afternoon, as though the long-necked giants and the great hunters all lived side by side and knew one another. But they did not. The age of the dinosaurs was not a moment. It was an ocean of time. From the first small dinosaurs to the very last of them, that age lasted well over 150 million years. More than 150 million years of dinosaurs walking the earth, being born and dying, changing slowly into new kinds, rising and vanishing and giving way to others, over and over, for a span of time so long that it makes the whole of human history look like the blink of a tired eye. Let me give you one comparison to hold on to, because it lands harder than any bare number can. The most famous of all the dinosaurs, the great tyrant lizard, the one with the terrible jaws that every child can name, lived right at the very end of the age of dinosaurs, in its final chapter. And the long-necked giant that so often stands beside it in our imagination, the huge plant eater with the endless neck and tail, lived tens of millions of years earlier, in an earlier chapter altogether. The gap of time between those two animals, between the giant plant eater and the tyrant lizard, is greater than the gap of time between the tyrant lizard and you, lying here tonight. That great hunter is closer in time to your own warm bed than it was to the long-necked giant we always picture it beside. When you truly take that in, the age of the dinosaurs stops being a single scene and becomes what it really was, a slow and turning world, longer than we can properly imagine, in which whole caste after whole caste of creatures came and went, and all of it, every bit of that immense stretch, sits inside a single chapter of our planet's much longer life, a chapter that scientists have given a name. They call it the Mesozoic. which is a word that means, more or less, the age of middle life, sitting as it does between the very ancient life that came before and the more familiar life that came after. The Mesozoic ran from about 252 million years ago to about 66 million years ago, and it is, near enough, the age of the dinosaurs from beginning to end. When you hear that word, you need not hold on to it or worry over it. It is simply the name of the long, warm, green stretch of the world's history that we are going to be walking through tonight. The age when, for a while, this whole planet belonged to the dinosaurs. Now that we have some feel for how deep in time we are going, let us do something quiet and useful before we go any further. Let us sort out, gently and clearly, what a dinosaur actually is. This matters more than you might think, because a great many of the creatures that people picture when they hear the word were not dinosaurs at all. They were relatives, near neighbors, cousins of a sort, and lovely animals in their own right. But they were not dinosaurs, and knowing the difference will make everything else we say tonight fall more neatly into place. Let us begin with what dinosaurs were, in the plainest terms. Dinosaurs were a particular group of land-living reptiles, animals with backbones, most of them laying eggs, that arose in the deep past and shared a single common ancestor. What sets them apart from other reptiles, more than anything else, is something you would notice at once in the way they stood and walked. Think for a moment of a lizard or a crocodile, and picture how its legs stick out to the sides so that its belly hangs low, and it moves with a kind of sprawling side-to-side crawl. Now picture a dog or a horse or a bird striding across a lawn, with its legs held straight down beneath its body, carrying its weight cleanly from above. Dinosaurs were built in that second way. Their legs came down directly underneath them, holding the body well up off the ground, so that they stood tall and walked and ran with their limbs swinging straight forward and back, not splayed out to the sides. That upright, legs underneath stance is one of the truest marks of a dinosaur, and it is part of why they could grow so large and move so well, and eventually do things no sprawling reptile ever could. They came in two great families, if you like, divided by a detail of the hips, and you do not need to remember the names. Only the friendly fact that from very early on, the dinosaurs split into two broad kinds that would each go on to fill the world in their own way. From these two beginnings would come everything: the long-necked giants and the armored plant eaters, and the great two-legged hunters and the horned and crested and duck-billed creatures, all of them, the whole grand and varied company. Some walked on 4 legs and some on 2. Some were plant eaters and some were meat eaters. Some were larger than any land animal before or since, and some, as we shall see, were no bigger than a chicken or a crow. But all of them, every last one, shared that same deep family root and that same upright way of standing on the earth. And now for the gentle correcting, the part I most want you to carry away from this chapter, because it is so easily and so often muddled. Many of the most famous prehistoric animals were not dinosaurs. Take the great flying reptiles, the ones with the leathery wings stretched between their arms and their bodies, the ones you picture wheeling and gliding through the ancient skies, some of them as large as a small aeroplane. Those were not dinosaurs. They were called pterosaurs, and they were close cousins of the dinosaurs, sharing a common ancestor not far back, living right alongside them through the whole age. But they were their own separate branch, and they took to the air in their own way. on wings built quite differently from a bird's. So the flying reptiles of the age of dinosaurs, marvelous as they were, belong on the branch next door, not on the dinosaur branch itself. The same is true, and even more so, of the great creatures of the ancient seas. When you picture the long-necked swimming reptiles paddling through prehistoric oceans, or the sleek dolphin-shaped hunters, or the great sea lizards with jaws like a crocodile, you are picturing marine reptiles, and not one of them was a dinosaur. They were reptiles, yes, and they lived in the same long age, and some of them were the fiercest hunters in the sea. But they belonged to quite separate groups of their own, only distantly related to the dinosaurs on land. Dinosaurs, for all their variety, were land animals. There was no such thing as a swimming dinosaur ruling the seas, and there was no such thing as a dinosaur soaring through the sky on leathery wings. Those roles belong to the cousins, so as we walk through this world tonight, hold that quiet distinction in your mind. The masters of the land were the dinosaurs. The masters of the sea and the masters of the air were their relatives, sharing the same warm world, but standing on their own branches of the family tree. There is one last thing to say here, and I will say it gently now and then return to it properly at the very end, because it is perhaps the most surprising fact in this whole night. The dinosaurs are not, in truth, entirely gone. One branch of them is still very much alive, all around us, so common and so familiar that we hardly think of it as anything strange at all. But that is a thread for later. For now, let us hold on to the simple, clarifying picture. A dinosaur is a land reptile that stood with its legs beneath it and traced its line back to one common ancestor, a family that split early into two great kinds and then spread into every shape you can imagine. Not the flyers, not the swimmers. Those were the cousins. The dinosaurs kept their feet on the ground, and there, for a very long time, they ruled. Every story has a beginning, and the story of the dinosaurs begins, strangely enough, not with a birth, but with a death, the largest death this world has ever known. To understand how the age of the dinosaurs got started, we have to look for a moment at the terrible thing that came just before it and cleared the ground, because the dinosaurs rose into a world that had very nearly been emptied. Cast your mind back to the far edge of the time we spoke of, to around 252 million years ago, right at the doorway of the Mesozoic. The world then was not yet the world of the dinosaurs. It was an older world, ruled by other creatures, strange reptiles and squat, sprawling beasts, some of them the distant forerunners of mammals going about their lives on a single gigantic landmass. For in those days nearly all the dry land of the planet was joined together into one supercontinent, one great sprawling country reaching from pole to pole. And then, in a stretch of time that was brief by the measure of these deep ages, that whole living world came apart at the seams. Something went badly wrong with the planet, and the great majority of living things, on the land and in the sea alike, simply died. It was the worst catastrophe life has ever suffered, so severe that scientists often call it, quite plainly, the Great Dying. By the reckoning of many who study it, the larger part of all the kinds of animals then alive were lost, and the seas, in particular, were nearly emptied of life. What caused it is still worked out and argued over, and I will not pretend we know every step of it, because we do not. But the broad shape that most scientists now favor points to an immense outpouring of molten rock from deep within the earth, a spell of volcanic activity so prolonged and so widespread, in a region of the world far to the north, that it poured out over an area you would struggle to picture, going on not for days or years, but across a long, grim stretch of time. That endless volcanism is thought to have flooded the air with gases that warmed the world, soured the seas and choked the sky, until the delicate web of living things could not hold, and most of it tore apart. That is the leading picture, and it is well supported, though the exact chain of cause and effect is still being pieced together. What is not in doubt is the result. Life very nearly ended. The world went quiet. But life did not end. It never quite does. In the long, slow recovery that followed, across the opening stretch of the Mesozoic, in a period that scientists call the Triassic, the survivors crept back out into a wounded and half-empty world and began, gradually, to fill it again. And a wounded, half-empty world is, in its own hard way, a world of opportunity, because so many of the old established creatures were gone, and so many of the old ways of living were suddenly open, waiting for someone new to take them up. Into that opened world, among many other recovering creatures, came a group of small, upright, quick-moving reptiles, nimble things running about on their hind legs, no larger at first than a dog or a wolf, easy to overlook among the larger and stranger beasts of the day. Those small, unremarkable runners were the first dinosaurs. It is worth sitting with how modest their beginning was, because it is the opposite of how the story usually gets told. The first dinosaurs did not arrive as the lords of the earth. They arrived as bit players, minor creatures on the edges of the scene, sharing their world with other reptiles that were, in those early days, larger and more numerous and more successful than they were. For a good long while, through much of that first Triassic period, the dinosaurs were a small and unassuming group, getting by, finding their feet, while other kinds of reptiles held the leading roles. There was nothing about those early years to tell you that this particular family, and not one of the others, would go on to inherit the whole world. Their upright legs and their quick, light build were quietly useful gifts, but they were not yet, on their own, enough to make the dinosaurs great. What lifted them, in the end, was another turn of the same hard wheel that had cleared the ground for them in the first place. Toward the close of that early period, there came a second upheaval, another sharp spell of dying, smaller than the great dying before it, but severe enough to sweep away many of the rival reptiles that had been keeping the dinosaurs in the shadows. And when the dust of that second reckoning settled, it was the dinosaurs, with their upright stride and their light, strong frames, that were left standing best placed to spread out and take up all the room that the losers had left behind. From that point on, they no longer shared the stage. They filled it. In the ages that followed, they would grow and multiply and branch into every shape and size until they were the largest and the most widespread land animals on the planet, ruling every continent there was. But it began quietly, in the aftermath of catastrophe, with a handful of small, quick runners in a broken and recovering world, inheriting an Earth that had been swept nearly bare. The age of the dinosaurs is so long, as we have seen, that we cannot take it in all at once, any more than you could take in a whole ocean by looking at a single wave. So the people who study it have divided it, helpfully, into 3 great stretches, 3 long chapters that run one after another, each with its own character, its own cast of creatures, and its own arrangement of land and sea. If you hold these 3 chapters loosely in your mind, the whole age will make far more sense. and you will begin to feel it as the moving, changing thing it really was, rather than a single frozen scene. So let us walk through the three great acts, gently, one at a time, and watch the world itself change around the dinosaurs as they go. The first act is the one we have just touched, the Triassic, the long dawn of the age. Picture the world then as a single joined together land, that one great supercontinent we spoke of, with all the dry ground of the planet gathered into one sprawling mass, and a single world ocean wrapped around it. Because everything was joined, you could, in principle, have walked from what is now one side of the world to the other without ever crossing the sea, though the middle of that supercontinent was a harsh and baking place, dry and hot, far from any softening coast. It was a warm world, warmer than ours, with no great ice caps at the poles. The plants of that first act were the old, tough, hardy kinds, ferns spreading low across the ground, and cone-bearing trees standing tall, and squat palm-like plants with thick trunks and stiff fronds. There were no grasses anywhere, and no flowers of any kind, not yet. It was a green world, but a somber green, all needle and frond and cone. And through it moved those first dinosaurs, still finding their feet, sharing the land with their many reptile rivals. The second act is the Jurassic, and here the world begins to loosen and to soften and to open up. That single supercontinent, which had held all the land together, began slowly to crack and to pull apart, splitting along great seams as the deep currents of the planet tugged its pieces in different directions. New seas came flooding into the widening gaps, and long arms of ocean reached in where dry land had been, breaking the one great country into smaller ones. And as the land broke up and the coasts multiplied, the harsh, dry heart of the old supercontinent gave way to a moister, greener, gentler world, wetter and more welcoming, thick with plant life. This was the great green age of the giants. In the lush forests of the Jurassic, the long-necked plant-eaters grew to the largest sizes that any animal has ever reached on land, wading through the ferns and reaching up into the tall cone-bearing trees, while the two-legged hunters grew alongside them to match. If there is one chapter that matches the picture most of us carry of the age of dinosaurs, the green and dreaming world of towering beasts, it is very likely this middle one. The third and last act is the Cretaceous, and it is the longest of the three, and in some ways the richest, and it ends, as we know, in fire. By now the breaking apart of the land had gone much further, and the world was coming to look, in its rough outlines, a little more like the world we know, with separate continents drifting slowly toward their present places, divided by wide and deepening oceans. Because the continents were now cut off from one another by sea, the dinosaurs on each of them began to go their own separate ways, evolving into different kinds in different places, so that the world grew more varied than it had ever been, each land developing its own particular creatures. This was the age of the horned dinosaurs and the duck-billed dinosaurs, and the armored, club-tailed dinosaurs, and of the very greatest of the hunters, including the famous tyrant lizard, which lived, remember, right here at the close, in the final stretch of this final act. And it was during this last act that the single greatest change of all crept quietly across the living world, a change so gentle in its arrival that it can be easy to overlook beside all the great beasts, and yet, in the long run, more important than any of them. Somewhere in the earlier part of the Cretaceous, For the first time in the whole history of the earth, flowers appeared. Flowering plants, the kind that clothe our own world so thoroughly that we hardly notice them, simply did not exist through most of the age of dinosaurs. For the whole of the first two acts, and even into this third one, there was not a single blossom anywhere on the planet. Not one petal, not one bloom. And then, slowly, the flowering plants arose and began to spread, and over the long stretch of the Cretaceous they crept out across the world, quietly at first, and then everywhere, until they came to soften the landscape into something that would, at last, begin to look and feel a little like home. The later dinosaurs, unlike all the ones before them, lived in a world with flowers in it. It is a small and tender thought to hold that the very last of the dinosaurs walked through the first fields ever to bloom. Of all the shapes that dinosaurs took across their long reign, there is one that stands above the rest, quite literally, and it is the one that has stayed with us most strongly. The picture that rises first in almost anyone's mind when they hear the word dinosaur. I mean the long-necked giants, the huge four-legged plant eaters with the small heads and the endless necks and the great pillar legs and the tapering tails that seem to go on forever. These were the largest animals ever to walk upon the land, in all the long history of the world, before or since. And there is something worth understanding about how a living thing could possibly grow so large and still manage the simple business of being alive. So let us spend a slow while with the giants and try to see them not as monsters, but as animals, breathing and feeding and going about their days. Let us start with their size, because it is the first and the largest fact about them, and it is genuinely hard to hold in the mind. The very greatest of these long-necked giants, the true titans among them, may have stretched from nose to tail tip as long as 3 or 4 city buses parked end to end, and weighed as much as a dozen or more full-grown elephants altogether. Their necks alone, in some kinds, were longer than a giraffe is tall, longer indeed than most of the rooms you have ever stood in, held out from the body like the boom of a great crane. When one of these animals walked, it did not scurry or trot. It moved with the slow, ground-shaking, deliberate gait of something too heavy to hurry, each footfall pressing deep prints into the soft ground, prints so large that a grown person could sit down inside a single one of them. To stand beside such a creature, if we ever could, would be to stand beside a living thing, as tall as a house and as long as a street. The first question that size raises is a simple and practical one. How on earth did they feed themselves? A body that large needs a staggering amount of food simply to keep going, day after day, and here the long neck turns out to be the whole secret, the clever heart of the design. That long neck let the animal stand in one spot, planted like a tree, and sweep its small head over a huge reach of forest without having to haul its whole massive body about. Picture it holding still on those pillar legs, its body like a great anchored barge, and simply swinging that long neck slowly up into the high branches that no other creature could reach, and then down and around, cropping and stripping the leaves across a wide arc of the forest, all without taking a single wasteful step. It was a way of gathering food across a great volume of the world, while spending as little effort as possible moving the heaviest part of yourself. And it worked so well that these animals kept it, in one form or another, for well over 100 million years. But here we come to a puzzle, and it is a good one. A neck that long presents a real problem for breathing, and for the plain business of moving air in and out. Think of trying to breathe through a very long tube. Much of the air you pull in never reaches your lungs at all, but only sloshes back and forth in the length of the tube, stale and useless. A creature with a neck many times longer than its own body ought, by rights, to struggle badly with this. And the answer to how they managed it is one of the most quietly wonderful things we have learned about them, because it connects the giants of the deep past to something you can hear singing outside your window this very season. These long-necked giants, it seems, did not breathe the way we do, with lungs that fill and empty like a pair of bellows, drawing fresh air in and pushing the same stale air back out. They very likely breathed the way birds do. And a bird's way of breathing is a marvel, a system in which the air flows through the lungs in a steady one-way stream, kept moving by a set of air sacs tucked through the body, so that fresh air is passing over the lung almost all the time, coming and going rather than sloshing in and out. That flow-through kind of breathing is far better suited to a long neck and a large body, and we can see the traces of it, the hollows where those air sacs once reached, preserved in the fossil bones of the giants themselves. And that same discovery answers a second puzzle at the same stroke, which is how a body so large did not simply collapse under its own weight. Those air sacs did not stay in the chest. They reached out into the bones themselves, hollowing them out from the inside, filling much of the skeleton with air spaces, so that the bones of these giants were not solid through and through, but were shot through with pockets and chambers, light and strong at once, much like the airy, hollow bones of a bird today. It is a beautiful piece of engineering, arrived at by slow degrees over ages, and it is the reason the giants could be so large without being impossibly heavy. Their skeletons were, in a real sense, partly built of air. The neck that let them feed, the breathing that let them run that neck, and the airy bones that kept them from crushing themselves. All of it hangs together as one connected design, and all of it points quietly toward the birds. There is one lovely detail more, about how they dealt with all that food once they had gathered it, and it shows how differently these animals were built from us. They did not really chew. Their small heads carried simple peg-like or spoon-shaped teeth, good for raking and stripping leaves from a branch, but not for grinding them up into a paste the way a cow or a horse does. So the leaves went down that long neck more or less whole, into an immense gut, where they were left to sit and soften and break down slowly over a long time, worked upon by the warmth and the churning and the tiny living helpers within, in a great fermenting vat of a belly, a body that large could afford to be patient with its food, holding it inside for days, letting slow chemistry do the work that teeth do in smaller animals. It is thought by some that they may also have swallowed stones to help grind the food within, as certain birds do, though how much this really mattered for the giants is still debated and far from settled. Either way, the picture is a calm one. A great anchored animal, standing among the tall trees, sweeping its long neck slowly through the branches, breathing in that steady bird-like stream, its airy skeleton holding it lightly aloft, and its patient belly quietly turning a forest's worth of leaves into the fuel that kept the largest creatures the land has ever known alive. If the long-necked giants are the animals we picture first, the great hunters are the ones we fear first, and none of them looms larger in the imagination than the tyrant lizard, the huge two-legged meat-eater with the massive head and the terrible teeth, the creature whose very name has become a kind of shorthand for everything fierce and ancient. It lived, as I mentioned, right at the close of the whole age, in the final stretch of the last act, and it was one of the largest hunters ever to walk on two legs. But the animal that really lived, once you set aside the roaring monster of story, is in some way stranger and more interesting than the legend, and a good deal more like a real creature going about the hard work of staying fed. So let us look at the hunters honestly, and gently separate what we have good reason to believe from what we have only imagined. Begin with the plain facts of its build, because they are impressive enough, without any exaggeration. The great tyrant lizard stood on two powerful hind legs, its body held roughly level, balanced by a heavy tail stretched out behind, its huge head carried well forward on a thick, muscular neck. It was long from nose to tail, longer than a bus, and it carried a great deal of weight, though a good part of the animal was neck and tail and air, so that it was not quite so ponderous as its bulk might suggest. Its head was the size of a bathtub, its jaws lined with teeth as long as a grown person's hand, thick and rounded rather than thin and blade-like. Teeth built not for slicing neatly, but for seizing and crushing, for biting down through hide and muscle and bone all at once. And its bite, as far as we can tell from the size and shape of the jaws and the muscles that drove them, was among the most powerful of any land animal that has ever lived, strong enough to crunch straight through heavy bone, which is not a thing most hunters can do at all. We even know, in a small and vivid way, that it did crunch through bone, because we have found the proof of it lying about in the fossil record. Scattered here and there are lumps of fossil dung, left behind by large meat-eaters of that time, and when scientists have broken them open, they have found them full of the shattered fragments of bone, ground up and swallowed along with the meat. That is a strangely intimate thing to know about a creature dead for 66 million years, that it bit down hard enough to splinter its prey's bones and took them into its belly along with the rest. It is the kind of small, solid, unglamorous fact that tells you more about how an animal truly lived than any painting of it ever could. Now for the two great questions that people always ask, and where we have to be more careful and more honest, because the honest answers are less certain than the confident stories suggest. The first is about its eyes and its senses. For a long time, it was fashionable to imagine that the tyrant lizard could only see things that moved, that if you stood perfectly still, it would somehow fail to notice you at all. This makes for a wonderful scene, but there is no good reason to believe it, and rather good reason to believe the opposite. From the shape of the skull, from the size and the forward-facing set of the eye sockets, and from the great space in the head given over to the sense of smell, it seems far more likely that this was an animal with keen eyesight, with both eyes facing forward the way a hunter's do, giving it good judgment of distance, and with a truly remarkable sense of smell. Besides, able to catch the scent of food from far off, across the land. Standing still would not have saved you. If anything, this was a creature superbly equipped to find you, by sight and by scent together. The second question is the one everyone wants answered, and it is the one where I must be the most careful of all, because it is genuinely unsettled. How fast could it run? Here the confident myth, the one where the great hunter thunders along at the speed of a racing car chasing down a speeding vehicle, is almost certainly wrong, and yet the true answer is still argued over even now. The trouble is the animal's own weight. Something that heavy, running fast on two legs, puts terrible strain on its bones and muscles, And there is a real question of whether the legs could have borne the forces of a full sprint without breaking. Many who study this now think that the great tyrant lizard did not truly run at all in the way we run, with a moment when both feet leave the ground, but rather moved at a very brisk walk, a fast, powerful, ground-covering stride, quicker than you could manage on foot, but well short of a gallop. Others think it could manage something faster over short bursts. The honest position is that we are not sure, that the exact top speed of this famous animal is still a matter of careful disagreement, and that anyone who tells you a precise figure with great confidence is telling you more than we really know. What does seem clear is that the picture of it as a swift and tireless sprinter belongs more to the world of film than to the world of the fossils. And there is one last gentle correction worth making about the hunters before we leave them, because it undoes a small cruelty in the old picture. We tend to imagine these animals as nothing but engines of violence, endlessly hunting, endlessly killing. And there is, of course, truth in the fact that they were meat-eaters and that they killed to live. But real hunters, then as now, spend most of their lives not hunting. They rest, and they wait, and they sleep, and they scavenge what is already dead when they can, because that is easier than a fight. And they raise their young, and they endure lean times, and they move slowly through their days more often than they charge through them. The great tyrant lizard was a living animal, with a living animal's ordinary needs, hungry and patient and mostly at rest, and not the ceaseless roaring terror of the imagination. There is something oddly calming in remembering that even the most fearsome creature that ever walked the earth spent the greater part of its life, as most animals do, simply lying still in the warmth, waiting for the day to pass. Now we come to a discovery that has quietly changed everything, one of the great turnabouts in all the study of these animals, and it is a change that happened not in the distant past of the subject, but within living memory, close enough that many of the people who brought it about are still alive to tell of it. For most of the time that people have known about dinosaurs, we pictured them as scaly. Great reptiles, we thought, covered in the pebbled, leathery, lizard-like skin that the word reptile brings to mind, grey and green and drab. And then, over the last few decades, a series of remarkable fossils came to light, most of them from a particular region in the east of the world where the conditions for preservation were near perfect, and those fossils showed us something we had not expected at all. Many dinosaurs, it turned out, were not scaly. Many dinosaurs wore feathers. The first of these feathered fossils were so startling that some people could hardly believe them. But as more and more of them came out of the ground, the case became overwhelming, and now it is simply part of the accepted picture. What the stones showed, again and again, was the clear imprint of feathers, or of the fine feather-like fuzz that came before true feathers, pressed into the rock all around the bones of small two-legged meat-eating dinosaurs, the very group, as it happens, that the great hunters belonged to. Some had a soft down, a covering of simple hair-like filaments, more like the fluff on a chick than the sleek feather of a grown bird. Others had proper feathers, branched and structured, laid along their arms and their tails, sometimes forming small wings, though many of these animals could not fly and never did. The feathers came first, it seems, and flight came much later, for only a few. And this raises the natural question of what all those feathers were for, on animals that stayed firmly on the ground. The answer seems to be that feathers began as something other than tools for flying, and were only much later, in one lucky branch, pressed into that new use. Most likely, the very first feathery coverings were for warmth, a coat of insulation to hold in the heat of the body, which, as we shall see, fits with a great deal else. We are learning about these animals. A soft down is a wonderful blanket, and a small active creature loses heat quickly and can use all the warmth it can keep. But feathers are good for other things too, and they seem to have been used for all of them. They can be colored and patterned, and so they can be used for display, to show off to a mate or to warn off a rival, or to recognize one's own kind, the way the bright plumage of birds is used today. They can shade a nest and shelter eggs and young beneath a brooding parent. Over the long ages, feathers that started as a simple warm coat were put to one use after another, growing longer and more elaborate in some kinds, until in a few of them, almost by accident, they grew long and light enough along the arms to catch the air, and the door to the sky swung quietly open. And now, for the part that seems almost too good to be true, the part that still makes me shake my head a little when I think about it, because it is the kind of thing you would swear could never be recovered across so many millions of years. In a few of these feathered fossils, preserved with a fineness that borders on the miraculous, scientists have found that they can begin to work out what colors the feathers actually were. This is possible because feathers get much of their color from tiny structures inside them, minute packets of pigment, and these packets have distinctive shapes, some round, some long and thin, and the shape is tied to the color, so that a round packet tends to mean one color and a long, thin one another. In the very best preserved fossils, those tiny shapes have themselves been preserved, pressed into the stone at a scale almost beyond belief, and by looking at their shapes and their arrangement under powerful instruments, scientists can make a careful, reasoned guess at the colors the living animal wore. So we now have a handful of dinosaurs whose colors we can begin to describe, and it is a wonderful, homely thing to be able to speak of the color of an animal that died before the flowers bloomed. One small feathered hunter, from the readings of those tiny pigment packets, seems to have worn a coat of reddish-brown, a warm ginger color, with a tail ringed in bands of light and dark, like a russet and cream-striped scarf. Another, a little crow-sized creature with feathers on all four of its limbs, seems to have been mostly black, but a black with a sheen to it, a glossy oil-on-water shimmer of the kind you see on a crow or a starling when the light catches it just so. These are not certainties, and I want to be careful here, for this is delicate work at the very edge of what can be read from a fossil, and the readings are refined and sometimes revised as the methods improve. But it is real science done carefully, and it has given us something we never thought we could have, which is a genuine glimpse of the colors of the deep past. The drab grey monsters of the old imagination are giving way to something far livelier and far more beautiful, a world of feathered animals in russet and black, and who knows what other shades, patterned and gleaming, going about their lives in the ancient forests. This brings us naturally to a deeper question, one that runs underneath everything we have said tonight, and it is a question whose answer has swung back and forth over the years in a way that is honestly rather instructive. It is this: what kind of animals were the dinosaurs on the inside? Were they slow and cold, like the reptiles we know, warming themselves in the sun and going sluggish in the cool, their pace of life set by the weather around them? Or were they warm and quick, keeping their own inner fire burning, active in the heat and the cold alike, more like the birds and the mammals? This is the question of whether the dinosaurs were, in the old words, cold-blooded or warm-blooded? And the story of how our answer has changed is a small lesson in how science itself works. For a long time, the answer seemed obvious, and it was simply taken for granted. Dinosaurs were reptiles, and reptiles are cold-blooded, and so dinosaurs, it followed, were cold-blooded too. And the picture that grew up around that assumption was one of slow, heavy, sluggish beasts, dull and torpid, dragging their great tails through the swamps, tails so heavy they must be rested on the ground, moving little and thinking less, waiting out the ages in a kind of reptilian stupor. That was the settled view for the better part of a century, and generations grew up with it. The dinosaurs of that older imagination were grand, but they were slow and rather stupid and altogether cold. And then, within living memory, the whole picture was turned over, and it began with a small, sharp-clawed hunter and the sudden realization of how it must have lived. Some scientists, looking hard at the light, agile build of certain meat-eating dinosaurs, at their long-running legs and their grasping hands and their large brains for their size, began to argue that these could not possibly have been slow, cold reptiles at all. These were built like active, quick, warm-blooded hunters, they said, animals that ran and leapt and struck with speed, that lived at a fast and lively pace. And from that one argument, a whole new picture spread outward and took hold. A picture of dinosaurs as active, dynamic, quick animals, warm-blooded or something close to it, holding their tails high off the ground, moving with real speed and purpose, more like great flightless birds than like overgrown lizards. This turning over of the old view was so complete that it changed how the animals were drawn in every book and shown in every film. And it is very much the picture most of us carry today. But here is where I must slow down and be honest with you, because the truth, as best we can tell it now, is not that the old view was simply wrong and the new view simply right. The truth is more interesting than that, and less tidy, and it is still being worked out. As scientists have looked more closely, using clever methods to read the pace of an animal's life from the microscopic structure of its bones, and from the chemistry locked inside them, and from the way its young grew up, a subtler picture has emerged. It now seems, to many who study this, that a good number of dinosaurs were neither fully cold-blooded in the old reptile way, nor fully warm-blooded in the way of a bird or a mammal, but somewhere in between, running a warm and active life at a pace of their own, warmer and quicker than a lizard, yet perhaps not keeping the same steady inner furnace that a robin or a mouse keeps burning day and night. Some may have leaned one way and some another. The great giants, simply by being so large, may have held their warmth in a way all their own, staying warm through sheer bulk, the heat of their bodies taking so long to seep away that they scarcely needed to make much of their own at all. So where does that leave us tonight? It leaves us, I think, in a good and honest place, which is to say that the plain question, were they warm-blooded or cold, turns out to have been the wrong question all along, or at least too simple a one. The dinosaurs were not a single kind of animal, but a whole world of animals, spread across 150 million years and every shape and size. And it should not surprise us that they did not all run their inner lives the same way. What we can say with some confidence is that the old picture of the dull, torpid, cold-blooded monster was mistaken, and that these were, by and large, more active and more alive than that. Animals with real energy and real pace. Exactly how each kind kept its warmth, and how close any of them came to the steady inner fire of a bird, is still genuinely open, still being read patiently out of the bones. And there is something rather nice, I think, in being able to say plainly that we do not entirely know, and that the finding out is still going on. We have been speaking all this while, as though we could simply see the dinosaurs, as though we knew their colors and their breathing and the pace of their inner lives by looking. But of course, no one has ever seen a dinosaur, not one living soul. Every single thing we know about these animals, we have had to read patiently and cleverly out of the stones they left behind. And it is worth stopping now to understand how that reading is done, because it is a quietly remarkable thing that we can know anything at all about a creature that died before there were eyes to watch it. And understanding how we know will also help us feel honestly where the edges of our knowledge lie, and how much even now we simply cannot say. Start with the bones themselves, and with the small miracle of how a bone becomes a stone. When an animal dies, almost always its body is simply lost, eaten and scattered and rotted away, until nothing remains. And this is the fate of very nearly every creature that has ever lived. But once in a great while, if the animal happens to die in the right place, in a river or a lake or a place where mud or sand is gathering, its body may be covered over quickly, buried before it can be destroyed, sealed away from the air and the scavengers. And then, across a long stretch of time, as more and more layers pile on top and press down, water seeps slowly through the buried bone, carrying dissolved minerals with it, and those minerals settle into the tiny spaces within the bone, filling it, hardening it, turning it grain by grain from bone into rock, until what is left is a stone copy of the original, faithful down to fine detail, lying locked in the layers of the earth. That is a fossil. It is not the bone itself exactly, but the shape of the bone rendered in stone, a portrait cast by the slow patience of water and mineral over ages beyond counting. For that stone portrait ever to reach us, though, a second piece of luck is needed, because a fossil buried deep and never uncovered is a story no one will ever read. The buried rock must slowly be lifted up again by the ceaseless working of the earth, and then worn away from above by wind and rain and river, cutting down through the layers until, one day, the edge of a fossil bone happens to appear at the surface, in a cliff or a slope or a bank, just at the moment when someone with a keen eye happens to be passing. When you consider how many separate strokes of luck have to fall in a row, the right death, the right burial, the long safekeeping, the lifting, the wearing away, and the passing eye, all lined up across countless millions of years, you begin to see that every fossil we hold is a rare and fortunate thing, and that the creatures we know are only the smallest sampling of all the creatures that ever were. For every kind of dinosaur we have found, there must be many more that lived and died and left no trace we will ever see, buried in the wrong place or destroyed, or still lying hidden in rock. No one has yet split open. The record is real, but it is full of gaps, a book with most of its pages missing. And the bones are only part of what the stones preserve. Some of the most touching things we know come not from the bodies of the animals, but from the marks they left while they were alive, the traces of their doings, frozen and kept. There are footprints, whole trackways of them, where a dinosaur once walked across soft mud or wet sand, that then dried and hardened and was buried and turned to stone, so that we can find today the actual prints of an animal's passing, one step after another, laid down in a single afternoon 100 million years ago. From a trackway, you can read things no bone can tell you. You can see how the animal held its legs, whether it dragged its tail or carried it clear of the ground, how fast it was moving by the spacing of its steps, and sometimes, most movingly, whether it walked alone or in company. For there are places where many trackways run side by side in the same direction. The sign of a herd moving together across the land, the young perhaps kept in the middle, all of them traveling as one. There are eggs too, and nests, and these have taught us more than almost anything about how the dinosaurs lived their family lives. We have found fossil eggs, some laid in careful rings and mounds, gathered into nesting grounds where many animals came back year after year to lay together in the same place. We have found nests with the small bones of the unhatched or newly hatched young still inside, and around some of them the signs that a parent tended them. And in one famous case, the fossil of an adult crouched directly over its nest in the posture of a brooding bird sheltering its eggs, caught and buried in that very act of care. These finds have gently overturned the old idea of the dinosaurs as cold, uncaring reptiles that abandoned their eggs and walked away. At least some of them, it seems, guarded their nests and tended their young. And there is something warm in that, in knowing that among these long-vanished animals there was, here and there, the ordinary tenderness of a parent watching over its own. And yet, for all that the stones can tell us, we must be honest about all the things they cannot, because the gaps are real, and it is no shame to name them. We cannot, for the most part, hear the dinosaurs. We do not truly know what sounds they made, whether they roared or bellowed or piped or rumbled. For sound leaves no fossil, and the great roars we imagine are guesses, dressed up by films, more likely wrong than right. We do not know most of their colors, only the few we have managed to read from the rare feathered fossils. We do not know much of their behavior, what they did in the dark, how they courted, how they played, if they played at all, for behavior too leaves little trace. We are always working from fragments, from a scattered handful of the pages, reasoning as carefully as we can from what little was kept toward the great mass of what was lost. That is the honest shape of this whole science. It is not a window through which we simply look at the past. It is a slow and patient reading of a few surviving marks, always partial, always open to revision, and it is precisely that honesty, that willingness to say we are not sure, that makes it trustworthy. The wonder is not that there is so much we cannot know. The wonder is that, from so little, we have come to know so much. We have spent so long looking at the dinosaurs themselves that we have not yet properly looked around them, at the world they move through. And I would like to do that now, gently, because a creature is never really separate from its world, and the age of the dinosaurs was a whole living landscape, full of things that were not dinosaurs at all. Let us set the dinosaurs down for a moment among the plants and the other creatures, on the ground and in the sky and in the sea, and take in the wider scene, so that we can picture not just the animals, but the whole warm, breathing world they belong to. Begin with the green of it, with the plants, because the plants were the foundation of everything, the food on which all the great plant eaters lived, and which fed, in turn, the hunters that lived on them. For most of the age, as we have seen, that green was of an older kind than ours. There were forests of tall, cone-bearing trees, relatives of the pines and the redwoods and the monkey puzzles, standing in great stands across the land. There were thick-trunked, stiff-fronded plants like squat palms, and there were ferns everywhere, spreading in low, soft carpets across the forest floor and along the water's edge, and taller tree ferns rising overhead. There were graceful fan-leaved trees, the kind whose last living relative you might still find planted along a city street today, a living survivor of that older world. And there were no grasses through nearly all of it, so the open ground was not the green lawn we would picture, but bare earth and low ferns and fallen needles, and no flowers at all, until, late in the story, the first blossoms crept out across the Cretaceous world and slowly, quietly, began to change the color of the land. Now lift your eyes from the forest floor to the sky, because the sky of that world was not empty, and what filled it was not birds, not at first, but those great flying reptiles we spoke of earlier, the pterosaurs, the cousins of the dinosaurs, who had taken to the air on their own leathery wings. And I want to return to them here, gently, precisely, because they are so easy to mistake for dinosaurs, and they were not. Picture them, though, for they were a genuine marvel of that world, gliding and wheeling on wings of skin stretched along an outlandishly long finger, some of them small and darting like a swallow, others so large that when they stood folded on the ground, they were as tall as a giraffe, and when they spread their wings they stretched as wide as a small aeroplane, very likely the largest creatures ever to fly under their own power in the whole history of the earth. They ruled the air for the greater part of the age, long before birds were common. But remember, as they crossed the sky above our imagined landscape, that they belonged to the branch next door. They shared the dinosaurs' world, but they were not dinosaurs. They were the flying cousins. And the same must be said, one more gentle time, of the creatures in the water, because the seas of that age teemed with great reptiles of their own, and not one of them was a dinosaur either. In the warm, shallow oceans that spread across so much of the world, there were long-necked swimmers rowing themselves along on four broad paddle-shaped limbs, their small heads held out on those endless necks to snatch at fish. There were sleek, smooth, dolphin-shaped hunters, reptiles that had gone back to the sea so completely that they had come to look, from a distance, almost like the dolphins that would fill that same role far in the future. And near the very end, there were the great sea lizards, huge and powerful, with long crocodile jaws, the top hunters of the late oceans, marvelous animals all of them, and the true masters of the sea in that age, but reptiles of their own separate kinds, only distantly related to the dinosaurs on the land. The dinosaurs never ruled the water. The sea belonged to these others. And then, last of all, look down, right down at the ground, at the small things moving among the roots and the leaf litter, in the shadows beneath the giants, because that is where the most quietly important creatures of all were hiding, and they were neither dinosaurs nor reptiles. There, underfoot, small and secretive, mostly active in the safety of the night, lived the first mammals, our own distant forebears. They had appeared right around the same early time as the dinosaurs, back near the dawn of the age. But where the dinosaurs had grown great and taken the world, the mammals had stayed small, most of them no bigger than a shrew or a mouse or a rat, keeping out of the way, scurrying about in the dark, living quiet and hunted little lives in the cracks of a world that belonged to something else. For over 100 million years, they stayed that way, small and hidden, going nowhere in particular, waiting, though of course they did not know they were waiting, for a door that had not yet opened. It is a strange and stirring thing to picture, once you know how the story turns, this tiny, furred creature no larger than your hand, crouched in the dark beneath the feet of the giants, holding within it the whole future that would one day include you. And so we come, as we always knew we would, to the ending, to the day the long green age of the dinosaurs came apart. It had lasted, remember, well over 150 million years, a span so long that it makes our whole human story look like a single evening. And then, around 66 million years ago, in what was very likely the space of a single terrible day and the hard years that followed it, that whole world was brought down, and the great dinosaurs, who had ruled every continent for so long, were swept from the earth. This is the most famous ending in the history of life, and the cause of it, as far as we can now tell, was a single visitor from the sky. On an ordinary day near the close of the Cretaceous, an object from space, a mountain of rock and ice, struck the earth. It was, by the best estimates, something like 6 miles across, a lump of stone as wide as a city is long, moving many times faster than any bullet. And it came down in the shallow sea off what is now the coast of Mexico, in a region called Chicxulub, where the buried scar of its impact still lies, a great ring in the rock more than 100 miles across, found not by digging for dinosaurs but almost by accident, by people searching the ground for oil. When that object struck, it released, in a single instant, more force than we can easily put into words, punching a hole clean through the shallow water and deep into the rock beneath, throwing up a curtain of shattered, melted, burning debris that was flung right out beyond the air and rained back down across much of the world. And it is the aftermath, more than the blow itself, that did the deep and lasting killing, and it is worth walking through gently, because it explains why an event in one corner of the world could reach out and end an age everywhere. The impact hurled such a staggering quantity of rock and dust and soot high into the sky that it spread, over days and weeks, into a pool that wrapped the whole planet, a veil of fine material hanging in the upper air and shutting out the light of the sun. And when the sunlight failed, the world went dark, and it went cold, a long, dim, sunless winter settling over the entire earth. In that darkness, the plants, which live on sunlight, began to fail, and as the plants failed, the great plant eaters that depended on them began to starve, and as the plant eaters died, the hunters that lived on them followed. The whole living web, from the green leaf upward, came apart from the bottom, quietly and thoroughly, in a famine that reached into every land and every sea. By the time the dust had finally settled out of the sky and the sun returned, something close to 3 out of every 4 kinds of living things on the earth were simply gone. And among the lost were all the great dinosaurs, every last one of the giants and the hunters, and the horned and armored and duck-billed kinds, the entire company we have spent this night with, wiped from the world. I should say, honestly, that the story may not be quite as simple as a single stone from the sky, and scientists do still discuss the finer points of it. Around the same stretch of time, on the far side of the world, there was also a long spell of that deep volcanic activity we met once before tonight. Molten rock pouring out over a great region across many thousands of years, fouling the air in its own slow way. And there is a real and ongoing conversation about how much that volcanism may have weakened the living world before the impact, or worsened things after, whether the world was already under strain when the blow fell. But the great majority of scientists who study this now agree that the strike from space was the decisive blow, the sudden catastrophe that turned a difficult age into an ending, and the evidence for it, that worldwide layer of debris, that buried crater, is about as solid as this kind of deep time evidence ever gets. Something came out of the sky, and the world of the dinosaurs did not survive it. It is a heavy thing to picture, and yet I do not want to leave you only with the darkness of it, because there is a gentler truth folded inside this ending, and it is this. An ending on that scale is also, in the long run, a beginning, exactly as the great dying long before had been a beginning for the dinosaurs themselves. When the giants were gone and the world at last grew warm and green again, it was full of empty room, all the old ways of living suddenly open, all the roles that the dinosaurs had held now vacant. And into that opened world crept those small, furred, hidden creatures we just left crouching in the dark, the mammals who had survived the long winter precisely because they were small and modest and able to shelter and to make do on little. With the giants gone, they came out at last from the shadows, and over the ages that followed they grew and multiplied and spread into every shape and size, into the whales and the horses and the elephants and the great cats, and in time, along one small branch of them, into us. We are here, lying warm and safe tonight, in a world made possible by that ending. The day the dinosaurs fell was, in the slow turning of things, the day our own long mourning began. And now, at the very end, I can give you back the thread I set down near the beginning of the night, the small surprising fact I promised to return to, and it is the loveliest note I know to close on. I told you, when we were sorting out what a dinosaur truly is, that the dinosaurs are not entirely gone, that one branch of them is still alive, all around us, so common that we hardly think of it as strange. It is time to keep that promise, because the truth, as clearly as science can now show it, is that the dinosaurs did not all die on that terrible day. One kind survived, and the descendants of that one surviving kind are with us still, and you have known them your whole life, and very likely you saw or heard some of them just today. They are the birds. Let me say it as plainly as I can, because it is not a poem or a pretty turn of phrase, but a plain finding of science, as solid as almost anything we have said tonight. Birds are dinosaurs, not merely the relatives of dinosaurs, not merely their descendants in some loose and distant way, but true dinosaurs themselves, the living members of that same family, sprung directly from those small feathered two-legged hunters we met a while ago, the very group that included the great tyrant lizard. Somewhere back in the age of dinosaurs, among all those feathered runners, one line took its feathered arms and, over long ages, turned them into wings that truly flew, and when the sky darkened and the giants fell, that flying line, small and feathered and able to get by, came through the long winter alive. Every sparrow at your window, every gull over the harbour, every pigeon in the square, every chicken in every yard, every eagle and owl and wren and swan, is a living dinosaur, a small, warm, surviving ember of that lost world, carrying its ancient family forward right into the middle of your ordinary day. Once you truly take this in, it changes the way the world looks, softly and permanently, and I find it a comforting change rather than a strange one. The age of the dinosaurs is not, after all, entirely a lost country, sealed away behind 66 million years. A living thread of it runs right up to the present and into your own back garden. When you watch a small bird hop across the grass, cocking its head, quick and bright-eyed and alert, and then flit up into a tree. You are watching, in a real and literal sense, a tiny dinosaur going about its day, the far descendant of those quick, warm-feathered creatures that ran through the ancient ferns. The little dinosaur crouched in the dark beneath the giants was our own forebear, the mammal. And the great dinosaurs themselves did not vanish without heirs. They put their heirs into the sky, and there they remain, singing at dawn over every land on the earth. The giants are gone, but their family is not extinct. It simply learned to fly and to sing and to grow small, and it is with us yet. And so our long walk through the age of the dinosaurs comes gently round to its close. We have travelled a very long way tonight, down through more time than the mind can properly hold, into a warm green world of a single joined together land, and watched it break slowly into the continents we know. We came to understand what a dinosaur really was, that upright land creature, and which famous animals were only its cousins, the flyers in the sky and the swimmers in the sea. We met the long-necked giants and learned how something so large could breathe and feed, breathing in that steady bird-like stream through a skeleton part built of air. We looked the great hunter honestly in the eye and set aside a few of its myths. We found the feathers and even began to read their colours, russet and gleaming black across the ancient forests. We watched our whole picture of these animals soften and warm and come alive. We learned how patiently the stones are read, and how much they hold, and how much they will never tell. We walked to the day the sky fell and the age ended, and found, folded inside that ending, the quiet beginning of our own kind. And we discovered that the dinosaurs are singing outside the window even now. There is nothing left for you to do tonight, and nowhere you need to be, and nothing more to hold in your mind. The great forests of the deep past are long gone, grown over and buried, and turned slowly to stone, and their giants sleep in the rock beneath our feet, and there is a deep and settled peace in that. In the thought of so long an age comes safely to its rest. Let the giants keep their long sleep in the ancient stone, and let the small birds keep their watch in the trees above, and let yourself now drift down after them into a rest of your own. Let your breathing slow and lengthen. Let your thoughts grow quiet and dim, like a long green evening coming softly down over an old and peaceful world. You are here, and it is now, and all of that immense and gentle history has flowed together, across more years than anyone can count, simply to arrive at this quiet moment, and at you, safe and warm and ready for sleep. Rest well. The birds will still be singing in the morning, small dinosaurs greeting the light, and the deep past will keep, patient and undisturbed, while you sleep soundly through the night. Sleep now, all is well, and the long day of the world goes on.